Alright guys, how's it going? A couple of months ago, I received the press materials for the 2020 Adrenaline Edition software, and I instantly started on a video covering the release. The most interesting feature to me was, in fact, something that we got earlier last year, but I had never really taken a look at it, and that was the image sharpening feature, which I found to be a great addition, and I now run with it on by default in any game that I play. It just makes everything look sharper, and in my opinion is a great boost in quality for what is basically free. Another big deal for some would have been the inclusion of Radeon Boost, which increases the frame rate by quickly lowering the resolution, unnoticeably in the majority of cases. And integer scaling was yet another addition that will work for some players who prefer older games. And as usual, I had decided to go over some of the older stuff as well, like Radeon Chill, which is still my default setting regardless of the games I play, and the entire software package is just absolutely fantastic. It really makes it difficult for me to justify going to Nvidia, though again obviously a lot does depend on what you play. So I was halfway through the script and already had it in my mind that that is exactly how the video would end. I do own both a 1080 Ti, a for the Win 3 no less, and a reference Radeon 7. And the Radeon 7 is the card that I choose to use. It lets me game at more than acceptable frame rates while allowing Radeon Chill, and now also image sharpening. I've slightly downclocked the card and it's running at only 950 millivolts in Wattman, which again is another great piece of the Adrenaline software suite. A card which was pilloried in the press as being loud, I can barely hear. And a quiet running card is more important to me than another 10 frames per second, especially when I'm running with a 143 maximum frames per second limiter anyway. And I can hit this with ease in most stuff that I'm playing, which to be fair is a lot of older and less demanding games. I actually showed this massive power saving in my Vega Liquid review, where dropping 9 frames saved 190 watts of power. 190 watts on that last few frames. And I also talked about how AMD tended to do this with their graphics cards in my Something Wrong at Radeon video, starting with the R9 290X and the 290s, which were blazing fast yet hot and loud due to being pushed past the sweet spot. Then Polaris was pushed further than it should have been as well, leading to this ludicrous PCIe power draw thing. And then again with Vega, which had to be pushed past its performance per watt sweet spot, yet still flopped kinda hard, even at that. But getting back to the Adrenaline video, why didn't I go through with it? Well, something just didn't sit right with me. More than one thing, in fact, which is why I simply had to do this video today. When I got the Vega Liquid, I clearly wasn't blown away by its price nor its performance. However, it was still the fastest card I had access to, as previous to that I was using an RX 580. As with every other AMD card I've owned in the last 6 or 7 years, I immediately undervolted it, and in the case of the Liquid as well, also decided to downclock the card by 100 MHz. The card would hit 1750 MHz or so out of the box. However, the power draw was absolutely astronomical, and the heat it was pumping out made my room very uncomfortable. Underclocked and undervolted, I enjoyed the card just fine. But every so often, whether playing a game, surfing the web, or just sitting idle on the desktop, the screen would go completely black. Anytime it happened, it was never recoverable. In fact, it was such a hard lockup that neither the reset nor the power switches even worked. The only way to recover the PC was by pulling out the power cord and waiting a few seconds. Now, I was also using Ryzen 1000 at this time, and everyone knows that the BIOS wasn't amazing, and anything at all would cause the PC to reset back to default. So I'd have to go into my BIOS and fix the memory again, then wait another 2 minutes while it tried to make the timing stick. Then when Windows finally booted, I had to go back into Wattman and set all my voltages and clocks manually again, as this was before Wattman had profiles. But I tolerated it because it was only happening maybe once per month for the first 3 months. But then it happened 3 days in a row one month, which had me tearing my hair out and finally had me doing the testing that I had been avoiding. I was fairly certain it must have been something to do with my undervolt, and I fully expected the card to crash while running the usual battery of tests like 3D Mark Firestrike, and of course for Mark. But it ran for hours, absolutely fine. Well, that's odd, I thought. So I then set the card to stock and ran the same tests, with the whole system power draw hitting an absurd 700 plus watts at the wall. Surely then, any instability would quickly make itself known. But nope. In fact, the card ran for hours absolutely fine. There was nothing that I could do to crash the card. Nothing except wait. And these seemingly completely random crashes continued for months. They literally came out of the blue. Perhaps once per week, or once per month, or 2 days in a row. There was just no pattern to it. Now obviously, one of the first things you do is search for other people having the same issues as you are. This one here appeared to have the exact issue that I was having. RX Vega 64 black screen bug. The problem occurs as the card starts to render 3D, but I've also had it happen by simply watching videos on YouTube. The screen goes black and then a few seconds later, the GPU fan spins down and the entire system locks up, prompting a hard reset. Not good. And there was a similar thread on Reddit talking about how the system would hang and require a power cycle. Some months later, I finally found out what the issue was due to this thread over at the AMD community site. I got a lot of problems with the RX Vega 64 Liquid Edition. This is my third card. RMA'd the other 2 cards before this one. The problem that I have is the Vega card randomly causes a black screen / grey screen. It doesn't matter what I do or what I play. It does it random, there is no pattern in the behaviour. And the user tried every driver that was available, disabled hardware acceleration, etc. before they finally discovered the real culprit. After watching the HBM2 down and up clocking constantly, he locked the HBM2 memory on 945 MHz in Wattman so that it couldn't downclock any longer. And this seems to have fixed the issue that he was working on for 8 weeks. And locking the HBM2 does fix the issue. However, the farce continued for a long time afterwards because the Wattman profiles just would not stick. They would reset to default on Windows loading for no apparent reason. So this meant every time Windows loaded, you had to check Wattman to see if the profile actually stuck, or you just had to wait for the card to hard crash again. And the user ended the post with, "I hope that the AMD driver / VBIOS team can take a look into this issue." But they never did, or if they did, they never fixed it, because the issue persists to this day. And I had a look through Guru 3D's long list of driver releases, and the Radeon Technologies group never once admitted that they had this HBM2 downclocking bug as a known issue. This was a $700 graphics card, AMD's flagship card for over a year, and that is unacceptable. Early 2019 and AMD's next flagship card, the Radeon 7, released to the by now typical Radeon Technologies group launch. Day 1 drivers were a disaster and the card was universally panned as being hot and loud. Jensen called it lousy, and I gave it 3 stars out of 5 after figuring out that by simply checking this undervolt GPU box in the drivers was all that was really needed to fix the worst of the noise. And generally speaking, I've been content to give the driver guy some leeway on new releases, as most of the teething issues are fixed within 2 to 3 months. Like here in the April driver, we can see that the Radeon 7 may experience screen flicker in multi-display setups. This was a known issue, which was fixed in the May release, so that's okay. What wasn't okay is it was again broken in the very next release. But this time they didn't actually admit to it being broken again in any of the patch notes. How can this happen? How can they fix an issue in one driver and then break it again in the next one? I figured they must have some kind of leapfrogging driver teams. Kinda similar to the way in which Zen has got leapfrogging design teams. So you've got one team working on the current driver and another team working on the next driver. At some point they come together. However, they've failed to do this properly with this fix. That seems a little bit unlikely to me. So maybe what's actually happening is fixing this flicker could have broken something else. Whatever the reason is, it doesn't matter. This is AMD's current flagship graphics card, which again cost $700. And what's more, it was heavily promoted by AMD as a prosumer card. This 16GB of HBM2 memory, perfect for content creation. What group of users are most likely to have multiple monitors? Correct. I use at least 2 and often 3 when editing my videos, as it just makes the workflow so much more tolerable. But then you get this irritating, distracting flicker, which makes the work a complete chore. I probably don't need to tell you this, but this is absolutely not on. How does the Radeon Technologies Group expect to be taken seriously in this market segment, with such a flaw lasting for what is basically an entire year? And presumably now, just like the HBM2 downclocking bug of the previous flagship Vega 64, will never be fixed. When Navi finally launched in July last year, I expected another hot and loud series that was, like every other AMD GPU in previous years, pushed a little too far past its sweet spot. When that arrived, yet was still received somewhat favourably in the press and by the AMD fans, that said a lot about just how dreadful Vega and the Radeon 7 were. The stark reality of the 5700 XT is that it gets beaten by the 2070 Super, a 12nm card, while drawing similar amounts of power. And if you understand just how good TSMC's 7nm is, this result looks like an absolute disaster at the architectural level. Navi 10 is a small chip though, and it was just pushed past its sweet spot. Otherwise, it would have been much more competitive in performance per watt against Turing. And we can see this quite clearly simply by looking at the 5600 XT, which exhibits 25% better performance per watt than the 5700 XT. And if you consider that they are both this same Navi 10 GPU, and that salvage parts historically nearly always exhibited worse performance per watt, that really does show just how far the 5700 XT was pushed past of its efficiency sweet spot as AMD chased the ultimate performance. But anyway, the reviews were generally on the positive side, mostly thanks to a last gasp $50 reduction in price. And that really was last gasp, happening 2 days before the reviews were due to go live. Of course, that had nothing to do with the fact that reviews would have been much less forgiving at $50 higher price. I don't think I've ever discussed this with you before, but during the review process, our PR guys will contact us and ask us, any chance we can see some charts, or what's your conclusion going to look like? And we'll tell them the truth, like we'll say, yeah, it's a decent card, but it's $50 too high. I can't recommend this over the competing Nvidia card at these prices, etc, etc. And then that gets relayed back to guys at the top, who then make the decisions required to change those conclusions. This is how this works. And when I saw this happen, I remembered how glad I was that I was no longer reviewing hardware and being dicked around by AMD's marketing right up to launch day. Overall though, it was one of their better recent launches. The reference cooler, as usual, wasn't amazing, but it didn't get slammed quite as hard as some of the others. The $50 price drop made it competitive against the 2070 Super on price. And in my analysis video, Navi's historical problem, I ended that with this. And finally, well, let's be frank, you'd be supporting AMD rather than Nvidia, which is priceless. It wasn't long before the Radeon Technologies Group falsified that theory. While Navi's launch wasn't disastrous, the following 7 months have been. And once again, drivers are the culprit. Blue screens of death, black screens, the dreaded flicker, and a whole host of other issues have plagued the series. And let's just take a look at the AMD Reddit today, 7 months after the cards were launched, to see what's going on there. Near the very top of the Reddit is this one, continuing our focus on delivering the best driver possible for 2020. And this is from the official AMD account. And there's a link to this blog post which was written on the 31st of January, not even 2 weeks ago, which pretty much sums up the glacial speed at which RTG reacts. And make no mistake about it, the only reason this exists is because of the overwhelmingly negative commentary on Navi, which had started to become a real problem that they felt that they had to address it in this way. What I found interesting about this though, was this long list of resolved issues. How many is that? 25, 30? Most of these which were never seen in any patch notes as any known current issues. And apparently, running the installer, choosing a clean install with factory reset fixes most of the worst issues. But surely, if this is truly the case, then rather than being hidden under additional options and unchecked, shouldn't factory reset be checked by default? and allow the user to uncheck it if they want. Not this way, which it is in the current installer. Why is this so difficult to grasp? I don't understand why AMD can't figure this simple stuff out. Though presumably, factory reset isn't the fix for most of the issues, and we can see this by continuing down the posts on Reddit. Refunding my 5700 XT because of driver issues and instability. Long-time AMD fan and customer. Now this is just 1 day ago and it has already got 3,000 plus upvotes. I have now had enough of the 5700 XT and constant black screens while gaming. I installed the latest drivers 2 days ago, and after that I've gotten around 15 black screens which need a hard boot. Every driver update seems to make it worse. There are so many people having these issues since the launch and it's still not fixed. The most stable drivers are some 4 months old, and some people are forced to use those to have some kind of enjoyable experience and do all of these weird fixes, like turning off hardware boost from software, disabling game overlays, using just one monitor, running display driver uninstaller before every update, reinstalling Windows, and other more shady stuff. I've been gaming on AMD GPUs for at least 10 years or more, and my experience has been good so far from the driver standpoint, and bang for buck. The 5700 series seemed like a good deal, and it is, but it is so horrendous from the driver side of things that I have to refund it and buy a 2070 Super instead, which costs around €150 more, but at least I'm able to play. Next one, I made an advanced survey for Navi owners. You can probably guess what questions are being asked. Radeon users take the short survey to potentially identify patterns in the seemingly random AMD GPU issues. This one was quite amusing. Am I the only one with no driver issues on my 5700 XT? So somebody seemed happy enough before saying, I've had my RX 5700 XT, the Red Dragon, for a month now, and the only issue I've had was infrequent black screens in The Sims. Now, infrequent black screens are not a feature, that is a bug. It's a known issue, in fact, and you are having driver issues with your 5700 XT. Most stable drivers, 5700 XT stability tip, and my experience, turning off enhanced sync and FreeSync, and it now works like a charm. And turning off enhanced sync was also a workaround that AMD noted in one of their patch notes recently. But it continued, my theory on the driver issues and black screens/crashes that plague a significant minority of 5700 and XT users. Possible driver instability workaround. 5700 series driver issues question. Most stable drivers. I need guidance. I've had the 5700 XT Nitro Plus for just over 2 months, and every single game has always crashed at least a few times from November through to today's latest drivers. From December onwards, it's been unusable. Does anybody have a driver version that's okay to use? And these posts just go on and on and on as far as the eyes can see over at the AMD Reddit. The place has been awash with driver complaints for months. And there are clearly severe ongoing driver issues with Navi, and anybody who tells you otherwise is simply lucky not to have them, or they are simply seeing it from their own limited perspective. And to make matters worse, it's not just the crashes and the black screens. Issues remain with performance as well. And you probably realise that I get a lot of emails from people who are having issues that they want me to bring attention to. One recent example was MechWarrior 5 on the 5700 XT, which exhibits clear FPS drops while zooming in. Unreal Engine, of course, and Unreal Engine remains a real issue for all Radeon cards. And this is the largest game engine by market, with more than twice the share of Unity at 23% total. And finally, to end this part of the video before my summary, Nathan Kirsch over at Legit Reviews tweeted this just over a week ago. This is what system crash looks like, boys and girls. Radeon Vega with Adrenalin 20.1.3 drivers that came out on the 29th of January. It isn't listed as a known issue, but if you look at the optional 20.14 drivers from the 27th, this was listed as a known issue. Grr, indeed. So black screens on Vega too, it seems. But it's not a problem if you just pretend it doesn't exist. And it was at this point when I finally decided I have had enough of the Radeon Technologies group. Big Navi looks set to be really fast. My information is that the leaked specs we saw are true. However, I'm not entirely sure which leaked specs they meant. Maybe it was the one with 80 compute units. It is a large GPU though, and some of the quotes that I've been told include, "It's looking good for this part, very good." And another source told me that the IPC gains are large due to most of what's left of the old GCN being swept away. However, I was also told that the clocks haven't been decided yet. The GPU might be too big for any relevant level or efficiency. Although, from my perspective, that depends entirely on its pricing and performance. And also, finally, on ray tracing. Ray tracing was only included because of customer perception. Similar to NVIDIA's PhysX, it's still not really relevant. And the email ended with, "We're hoping for a third quarter release." So that all seems promising, and AMD looks set to retake the hardware performance crown for the first time in 6 or 7 years, unless NVIDIA can get their own 7nm cards out the door first of all. But even if AMD does take the crown, it just doesn't matter. You all know I'm a fanboy. I'm a fanboy of forcing companies to shape up and clean up their acts. Historically, that meant that NVIDIA got ire for their dirty, underhanded behaviour. AMD got ire for their competence problems, and Intel gets ire for both today. Today, though, I have to accept that the Radeon Technologies Group is basically now the Intel of GPU. It is unacceptable that multiple flagship cards have had multiple driver issues, which essentially break the cards completely. I didn't pay the $700 cost for the Vega Liquid, nor the Radeon 7. However, I paid more for them with my time, the time spent reviewing those cards, and having to deal with all the driver issues. And to make matters worse, I always do this no matter which product I've ever reviewed. I tried to make a justifiable purchasing case for it. That was really, really hard with the Vega Liquid, by the way, and it essentially came down to FreeSync, which was the card's sole saving grace against NVIDIA, which of course they no longer have. With the Radeon 7, the 16GB of VRAM and the prosumer angle just about made it a viable purchasing case. However, in both cases, the Radeon Technologies Group failed to provide a reasonable working solution for these cards' issues over the duration of a year or two. In the case of Navi, as I said, you'd be supporting AMD and NVIDIA, which is priceless. But in fact, that did come at a price. The price of months of frustration before finally giving up and buying an NVIDIA card instead, simply in order to game. And with the Radeon Technologies Group charging far higher than their historical prices, that is just one less reason to go with AMD over NVIDIA. And with the Radeon Technologies Group pretending these driver issues don't exist, then that's just yet another reason gone. That is anti-consumer behaviour, which will simply get worse if we let it. And so, to end this, I can no longer, in good conscience, recommend any AMD Radeon graphics card. Even if Big Navi is 50% faster than the 2080 Ti, I still couldn't recommend it. AMD are surely going to price it north of $1,000. Would you pay that for a card beset by the kinds of driver issues that we are seeing here? If you do and it ends up being a purchasing decision you come to regret, then at least my hands are clean in this case. And for any hardware reviewers watching this, I would strongly recommend that you follow suit and stop recommending Radeon until RTG prove themselves capable of getting on top of these driver problems. And RTG, you have got 6 months to fix not only RDNA 2's drivers before the launch of Big Navi, but also these issues which continue to plague Vega and Navi users today. Others might forget about it, but I won't. Presumably all this has happened because of a lack of manpower. Well, the Radeon Technologies Group is charging high enough prices now, and they are making enough money today to hire more people to fix these problems. They brought themselves up to NVIDIA's price segments and adopted some of their more questionable marketing practices too. And I am now welcoming them to NVIDIA's world, where they will be held accountable for both. And as for the AMD fanboys who are about to come whining at me, if Big Navi launches like a normal, borked Radeon launch, and then the drivers end up as bad as they are for Navi today, it will be absolutely disastrous for the company in the long run. Being faster than NVIDIA is not enough when the drivers are so bad. The Adrenalin software suite is absolutely fantastic, and Big Navi looks like it could be real killer hardware, finally. And I didn't want to make this video, but the Radeon Technologies group left me with no choice because the driver issues are ruining their products. I'll catch you later, guys.